I thought I knew what I was getting myself into. After all, I had spent months planning every detail of my wedding, from the flowers to the cake, the seating arrangements to the dress. It was all perfect. But what I didn't plan for, what no one could have predicted, was the horror that would unfold on what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. It started out like any other wedding night. I was glowing, excited, nervous, full of love and anticipation. Nathan, my new husband, had been everything I had ever dreamed of. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to love me as much as I loved him. Our wedding had been beautiful. It was held in a secluded mansion that had been in his family for generations. The walls were old, creaking with the weight of time, but the grandeur of the place was unmatched. The whole night felt like a fairy tale, until the lights flickered and the air grew inexplicably cold. After the last toast, after the final song of the night, Nathan and I slipped away to our room. It was tucked away at the farthest corner of the mansion, its ornate door creaking open as we entered. The room was bathed in soft candlelight, and the bed was covered in rose petals. Everything seemed perfect. But as soon as the door shut behind us, I noticed something off. The air in the room felt wrong. It was too still. The silence was thick and suffocating. And then, the floorboards creaked underfoot, like someone had just stepped inside. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Nathan, clutching his arm. Nathan smiled at me, his usual calm reassuring me. "It's just the house settling, love. Don't worry. Let's get some rest. We'll be fine." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My heart pounded in my chest, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up as the shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, darker, reaching toward us. I turned to the large, antique mirror that hung above the dresser. My reflection stared back at me, but something was off. It wasn't me, not entirely. My reflection seemed to twist in ways I couldn't explain, and I could see something, someone, standing just behind me. But when I spun around, the room was empty. "Did you see that?" I gasped, panic creeping into my voice. Nathan walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're just tired, darling. Let's go to bed." I didn't argue, but as soon as my head hit the pillow, sleep didn't come. Instead, a chill settled over the room like something was watching us. I turned to Nathan, but he was asleep, his breath slow and steady. It wasn't just the cold that unnerved me, it was the whispers. Faint, like the soft brushing of voices on the wind, but there was no wind. They were coming from inside the room, from the walls themselves. "Help, please, help." The words were faint at first, then louder, clearer. "You don't belong here." I bolted upright, heart racing. Nathan stirred beside me but didn't wake. The whispering continued, growing more frantic, more insistent. "Leave, before it's too late." I jumped out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. The whispers were coming from the walls now, scratching, clawing as if something was trying to escape. My breath caught in my throat as I backed toward the door, my eyes darting around the room. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No answer. Only the sound of my own breathing, harsh and panicked. The mirror, shuddered. The reflection within twisted again, and I saw a woman in the glass. She was dressed in a wedding gown, exactly like mine, but her face was pale, twisted in agony. Her eyes were hollow, empty, as if life had been drained from her. She reached out toward me, her hand pressed against the cold surface of the glass. "No, no," I screamed, stumbling back. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the whispers stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it now. Something was in the room with me. Something dark. Something ancient. I looked to Nathan, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the terror creeping through the walls. But then my eyes caught something in the reflection of the mirror. It wasn't me anymore. It was her, the woman in the gown. She was standing in the shadows behind me. I could barely breathe. My body was frozen in place, my mouth dry as the woman's form began to move, gliding closer. The reflection, though, never moved. She was still standing in the mirror. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The woman reached out to touch me, her cold fingers brushing my skin. That was when I realized the awful truth. This wasn't my wedding night, it was hers, and she wasn't going to let me leave. The whispers returned, louder this time, frantic and desperate, and I finally understood she was trapped here, and I was about to become part of her vengeance. The room seemed to close in around me. The walls shifted, the air thickened, and I knew I was no longer alone in that room. Something was coming for me, and there was nowhere to run. I should have known. Deep down, I should have recognized the warning signs before it was too late. But love, and the blissful haze of a perfect wedding, had blinded me to the creeping darkness that had followed us into the mansion. That night, after the strange happenings in the room, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. But the truth is, I was wrong. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. When I woke the next morning, the house was eerily still. Too still. Nathan lay next to me, still in a deep, dreamless sleep. His calm, steady breathing only made my heart race faster as I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night felt surreal now, like a nightmare that didn't belong in the waking world. I told myself that I had to be imagining things, that the whispers, the reflection in the mirror, were just part of some twisted dream. But as I moved to get out of bed, a sudden weight in the air stopped me. It felt like hands, invisible hands, pressing down on my chest, holding me in place. I gasped for breath, but the pressure only increased. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath in front of me, thick and white in the frigid air. My heart pounded in my ears as I tried to break free from the invisible force that had trapped me. "Nathan," I gasped, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. I reached for him, but I couldn't move. It was as if something was holding me back, keeping me from making a sound, from even lifting my arms. Nathan stirred slightly, but he didn't wake. He seemed so far away, like he wasn't even in the same room. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. It was like the very air had turned thick, heavy with a presence that wasn't human. I looked around the room, my eyes frantically searching for any sign of movement. But nothing. Nothing at all. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch longer, darker. But that could have been my mind playing tricks on me. I wasn't sure anymore. And then it came. The softest whisper, just beneath my breath, as though it were speaking directly into my ear. "You cannot escape me." The words froze me in place. My blood ran cold. I felt the air shift, like something was moving around me, just out of sight, but I couldn't see it. The force pressing down on me grew stronger. It was as if the very room itself was alive, pushing me back into the bed, holding me captive. I tried to reach for my phone, my trembling hand brushing against the nightstand, but it was no use. The force kept me pinned, helpless, like an insect caught in a spider's web. And then, the whisper started again, louder this time. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus of voices, murmuring, pleading, threatening, too many voices. I couldn't make sense of them, but I knew one thing for certain: they were angry. They were full of rage, and they were coming for me. The words were sharp, like knives, cutting through the air. "You took what was mine." I froze. The room seemed to warp and twist around me. For a moment I couldn't breathe, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The force was gone. The whispers faded into silence, leaving only the echo of their presence behind. The temperature in the room began to return to normal, the air no longer thick with invisible pressure. My chest rose and fell in rapid breaths, and I could finally move again, but I was paralyzed with fear. What had just happened? What was that force? I turned to Nathan, shaking him awake. "Nathan, wake up. Please, something's wrong." He stirred, blinking his eyes open, but his expression was different, cold, distant. There was no warmth in his gaze, no recognition. "Are you all right?" His voice was flat, empty. It didn't sound like the Nathan I knew, the man I had just married, the one who had been so full of life the day before. I don't know," I stammered, confused. Something happened. There was something in the room, something was here." Nathan sat up slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at me, as if he were trying to piece together something that didn't quite make sense. "Maybe you're just stressed," he finally said, though his voice lacked the comfort it used to hold. "It's been a long day. Maybe you need some rest." But I could tell. I could feel it. There was something wrong with him. The way he spoke, the way his eyes darted around the room, it wasn't Nathan. It was like he wasn't even here anymore. I stood up, the room spinning beneath me, and tried to steady myself. My heart still pounded in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. But Nathan didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice that I was standing. I backed away slowly, feeling the chill in the room grow even colder. I needed to get out of there, away from this place. But as I turned toward the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of the mirror on the wall, I could see her. The woman in the wedding gown. She was standing behind Nathan, her cold, empty eyes fixed on me through the glass. Her face was twisted in pain and rage, and her mouth slowly stretched into a smile that made my stomach lurch. He belongs to me now. And that was when I realized. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the mirror. There was something far darker at play here, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I had no idea who she was or why she was haunting me, but I knew one thing. Whatever she wanted, I was not going to give it to her. But deep down, I knew it might already be too late. The feeling of being watched never left me, even as I stood in the middle of the room, staring at Nathan, who still remained eerily motionless on the bed. The woman in the mirror, her, was still there, standing just behind him, her eyes locked onto mine with a hunger that made me feel like prey. I could hear the soft scrape of her fingers against the glass, and I felt a chill that I couldn't shake. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't look away from the reflection. It was impossible. She wasn't real. She couldn't be real. But the longer I stared, the more the reflection twisted. The woman in the gown wasn't standing behind Nathan anymore. She was now standing directly in front of me, her figure somehow stepping out of the mirror, just inches away from my trembling body. My breath caught in my throat, and I staggered backward. The reflection in the mirror didn't change. It was as though the mirror was showing a different reality, one that was bleeding into the world around me. I could see her gown more clearly now, a tattered, blood-stained wedding dress that looked ancient. The lace was frayed, the fabric torn in places, as if it had been dragged through years of decay. It shimmered in the candlelight of the room, and I couldn't stop my eyes from tracing the deep, dark stains on the hem, the red stains. A low, aching whisper filled the room, and my eyes snapped to Nathan. But he hadn't moved. He didn't hear it. He didn't hear anything. "You'll never escape me." The voice was so faint, I wasn't sure if it came from the woman in the mirror or from somewhere else entirely, but it felt like it came from her. I took another step back, desperately trying to pull myself together. But the air in the room was heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Every inch of space felt filled with something dark, suffocating. I tore my gaze away from the mirror, finally managing to force myself to look at Nathan. But when I turned, something shifted. The room seemed to warp around me. The floorboards creaked ominously, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching across the walls and floor like black tendrils reaching for me. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but I was frozen. The silence in the room had deepened, and now the only sound was the beating of my own heart, growing louder and louder in my ears. It was a countdown. Something was coming. I could feel it. "Nathan," my voice trembled as I whispered his name. "Nathan, wake up. Something's wrong. Please." He didn't respond, didn't even blink. I looked back at the mirror, and the woman, she was closer now. Her face, once distant, was now inches from mine. I could see the details more clearly now. The hollow, sunken eyes, the smile that didn't reach her lips, the pale, lifeless skin stretched too tightly over her skull. Her hand raised, her fingers cold and elongated like claws, and she was reaching for me. I staggered back, my legs unsteady beneath me, as the woman's hand seemed to press against the mirror, no longer just a reflection but something real. The glass cracked, splintering into jagged shards, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of her voice louder now. "You took my place. You took him from me." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The room had started to spin, and I felt like I was falling into the mirror itself. The gown shimmered with a dark, unnatural glow, and the whispering intensified, turning into a shrill wail that scraped at the edges of my sanity. Then, a sharp crack. The mirror shattered. The glass exploded outward, spraying across the room like 1,000 tiny daggers. I instinctively shielded my face, but there was no pain. The pieces of glass just vanished into the air, as if they had never existed. In their place stood the woman. She was here, In the room. Alive. Her gown swirled around her as she stepped forward. Her face was inches from mine, and I could feel the coldness of her presence wrap around me like an icy vice. The scent of rot filled the air as she reached up, her hand grazing my cheek. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her breath rancid and cold. "You never belonged here." I could barely breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The wedding gown. It was her death shroud. I finally managed to speak, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Who are you?" The woman's lips twisted into a cruel smile, her eyes flashing with a fury that I couldn't comprehend. "I was once the bride. I was once loved, but that was taken from me." Her hands trembled as they hovered near my neck, her cold fingers brushing against my skin. "I died on my wedding night, trapped in a cage of promises and lies. But my love was taken, and now you must pay for it." Her fingers tightened, and I could feel the cold pressure around my throat. I gasped for air, panic consuming me. Was she going to kill me? Was this how it ended? But then, just as quickly as it had started, the pressure disappeared. I fell backward, my legs giving out as I collapsed onto the floor. The woman's laughter echoed through the room, hollow and haunting. "You don't know it yet, but you are already mine." I tried to scramble backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps. But I couldn't escape her. Not now, not ever. The gown, the dress, shifted like it was alive, as though it had a will of its own. And I realized in that moment that it wasn't just her dress, it was her. She was wearing it, yes, but it was wearing her too. And it was waiting for her vengeance. And as the woman's figure started to dissolve into the shadows, I heard the final whisper that chilled me to my core. "You will wear it too. One day, you will wear my gown, and you will know what it feels like to be taken." I couldn't sleep. I hadn't slept since that night, the night the woman in the mirror had stepped out and made her intentions clear. Since then, everything had changed. The air was thick with tension, and the house, our new home, felt like it was closing in around me. The walls creaked in the dead of night, and I could hear faint whispers that never seemed to stop, echoing just beyond my reach. Nathan still hadn't spoken. He hadn't acknowledged me, hadn't even looked at me properly. He'd become a stranger, detached, distant. His gaze was vacant, like he wasn't really there anymore. The man I had married, I couldn't feel him in him anymore. He was gone. And then there was her, the woman in the gown, the one whose vengeance had stained this house with death. She wasn't just haunting me, she was consuming me, and I felt her presence in everything I did, everywhere I went. I could feel her cold breath on the back of my neck when I entered rooms, the soft rustle of fabric in the corners of my vision when I wasn't looking. She was always there, watching, waiting. But that night, midnight, I finally understood. The clock had barely struck 12 when the whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around me like a storm. I had been standing in front of the mirror again, unable to stop myself. I didn't want to, but it was like the glass called to me, like it had its own gravity. "I will make you understand," the voice whispered, the same voice I had heard before, like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard. I spun around, my heart racing. The room was empty. The bed, where Nathan had been lying, was now cold, too cold. But the shadows in the corner of the room seemed darker now, swirling, twisting as if they had a life of their own. They moved. I had seen shadows before, of course, but not like this. These were not just shadows of light and dark. These were the shadows of something more, something that existed beyond our world. I took a step backward, my heart pounding, but before I could turn to flee, I heard it. The faint sound of fabric brushing the floor, slow and deliberate. It was like the sound of someone walking toward me, their footsteps muffled by the carpet, but there was no one there. And then I saw her. She was standing in the doorway, bathed in moonlight that cut through the curtains like a knife. Her gown, the same tattered, blood-stained wedding dress, hung loosely from her skeletal frame. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded over her shoulders, and her hollow, empty eyes were locked onto mine. Her lips parted, and she whispered the words that had been building up for so long. "You took my place. You took him from me." Her voice was low, like a death rattle, but it was filled with a malice that made my blood run cold. She stepped forward, and the floor creaked beneath her, but I couldn't move. I was frozen. She was too close now. I could feel the chill emanating from her, like a blast of icy air, and I couldn't breathe. It was suffocating. He was mine. The woman's voice broke through the silence again, each word seething with hatred. I was meant to marry him, not you, and now you will pay for stealing him away from me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. The shadows, the ones that had seemed so distant just moments before, now wrapped themselves around me like chains. I was trapped. You will wear the gown, she continued, her lips curling into a twisted smile. You will understand what it's like to be abandoned, to be left behind. In that moment, I understood what she meant. She was trying to drag me into her misery, into her pain, into the endless suffering that she had experienced on her wedding night. She wanted me to feel what she had felt. She wanted me to wear the same blood-stained gown, her gown, and become just another lost bride, forever bound to the same fate she had endured. Without warning, her cold hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. It was like ice, freezing me from the inside out. Her grip tightened, and I could feel myself being pulled toward her, toward the dark shadows swirling around her like a vortex. You will join me, she whispered. You will never escape me. But then, something inside me snapped. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let her win. I fought. I fought with everything I had, shoving against her cold, unyielding grip. I kicked and screamed, desperate to break free. And somehow it worked. I wrenched myself from her grasp, stumbling backward, away from her reach. The room began to shake violently. The shadows writhed and the air grew thick, like the very house was alive, trying to trap me. I felt a sickening sensation, as if something was clawing at my soul, trying to pull me back, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay in that room. Not with her there. Not with her insane rage filling the air. I burst out of the bedroom, running down the hall, my breath ragged, my legs unsteady beneath me. The walls seemed to pulse with the energy of something dark, something ancient, and I could hear her voice, louder now, closer, whispering my name. You can't run. I ran faster. But no matter where I turned, no matter how fast I went, it was always there. The cold, the whispers, the shadows that followed me, as though they were alive. I reached the front door, and I didn't stop. I yanked it open, flinging myself out into the night. But when I looked back, I saw her, standing in the doorway of the mansion, the moonlight casting her long shadow across the yard. Her laughter echoed in the night, hollow and full of despair. You can't escape me. You can never escape me. The last thing I heard before the door slammed shut behind me was her whispering one final haunting phrase. Vengeance has no end. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw it. I thought I was just imagining things at first, but when I stepped onto the property, the feeling was undeniable. The house was old beyond anything I had ever seen. Its windows were like empty eyes, dark and hollow, staring down at me from the overgrown yard. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind, and I could hear the faintest sound of something stirring inside, like a soft whisper calling me in. I had been looking for a place, something cheap and out of the way, somewhere to get a fresh start. The listing had seemed perfect, a charming fixer-upper in a quiet neighborhood. The price was too good to be true, but I figured it was just one of those rare deals. I didn't hesitate. I made the call, and within a week, I was here. But as I stepped closer to the house, a heavy unease settled over me. The air was thick, like it didn't want me there. I shook it off. I had come all this way. I couldn't turn back now. When I crossed the threshold, the first thing I noticed was how cold it was. Even though it was the middle of summer, the air in the house felt like it had been frozen in time. My breath came out in small puffs of mist as I made my way through the dark, musty hallway. The smell was overpowering, a mixture of mildew, something sour, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. It reminded me of old books, but with a rancid edge. The walls seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, making the house feel like it was eating the light itself. I made my way through the living room, taking in the sight of the furniture that hadn't been touched in years, the thick dust settling over everything like a blanket. The wallpaper was peeling, faded in some places, and there were strange stains on the floorboards, too stubborn to be cleaned. But it was the walls that really unsettled me. They weren't just covered in grime. There were cracks, deep, jagged cracks running from floor to ceiling, as if the house was on the verge of splitting open. And then there were the whispers. At first I thought it was just the house settling. But the longer I stayed in the living room, the more I began to hear it. Soft, unintelligible murmurs, like voices just out of reach. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself looking around the room, searching for the source. It felt like the walls were alive, pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I made my way through the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The whispers followed me, growing louder with each step. The voices sounded almost too real, like they were just behind the walls, but no matter how I looked, there was nothing there. Only the cracks, the stains, and the darkness that seemed to swallow everything in sight. As I stepped into the hallway again, I noticed something I had missed when I first entered. At the far end of the hall was a door, tucked away in the corner, almost hidden by the shadows. It was a small door with an old brass knob, worn with age. Something about it seemed out of place. I don't know why I felt compelled to open it, but I did. The door creaked as I turned the knob, and I was met with a stairwell that led down into the basement. The temperature dropped even further as I stared into the darkness below, my breath fogging in front of me. The whispers grew louder now, and I realized they were coming from down there. A voice, clearer than the rest, sliced through the air. "Get out." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know if the voice was in my head or if it was really coming from the shadows beneath the stairs, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in this house. And whatever was here, whatever had been here before me, didn't want me to stay. I should have turned around then. I should have left. But I didn't. I was already too deep. I needed to know. So, despite the chill crawling up my spine, despite the voice still whispering, I took a step forward. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into the blackness below. The basement was cold. Colder than anything I had ever experienced. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the room, its weak beam dancing over the walls, the floor, and the strange symbols that had been scrawled across the stone. There was something in the corner of the room, something that didn't belong. A figure, huddled in the shadows. I took another step, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "You shouldn't be here." The voice came again, louder now, and this time I knew it wasn't my imagination. Whatever was in this house, whatever had stayed in this house, it was telling me to leave. But it was too late. I had already found the thing the house wanted to keep hidden. And once you know its secret, there's no leaving. Not unless it lets you. I tried to back away, but the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers turned into screams. And now, I was part of them. The house that should never have been lived in, was never going to let me leave. The basement had been the beginning, but it wasn't where the house's true secret lay. No, that honor belonged to the attic. I should have left after hearing those screams. I should have packed my things and never looked back. But something in me, some deep, unrelenting curiosity, kept me there. I spent the night in that basement, the screams echoing in my ears, the cold sinking into my bones. I had no choice but to stay. The house wouldn't let me leave. By the morning, the air felt a little less suffocating, but the tension remained. I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the small door at the far end of the room that led to the attic stairs. The whispers had started again, too faint to understand, but constant, like a pulse that beat beneath the very walls of the house. They were coming from up there, the attic. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The house was alive with something, and that something had found me. The attic door loomed over me, dark and foreboding, the wood weathered and scarred. The staircase was narrow, winding upward like a tunnel that reached into the heart of the house. I didn't want to go up there. I didn't want to hear those voices any louder than I already had. But I did. I didn't think I had any choice anymore. As I opened the door, the floor above creaked and groaned, as if protesting the very act of my intrusion. The stairs were steep and unstable, each step feeling like it would collapse beneath my feet, but I pressed on. The whispers followed me, growing louder with every step. "Get out! Get out!" I reached the top and paused, listening for any sign of movement. It was dead silent, too silent. And then, I heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the wooden floor. My heart hammered in my chest as I took a cautious step forward, my flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. The attic was vast, a space that stretched endlessly under the sloping roof. Dust hung thick in the air, and old furniture, tattered and covered in sheets, stood in the corners, abandoned but not forgotten. The voices were clearer now, faint at first, but then they grew louder, more distinct. They weren't just whispers anymore, they were calling to me. Help! Help us! I froze. The voice was female, desperate, pleading. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it sounded as if it were directly in front of me, despite the emptiness of the attic. My heart raced as I scanned the room. The walls were lined with old boxes, stacked haphazardly, and the beams above creaked ominously, but there was nothing, no one in sight. And yet, the voice continued, "Please, don't leave us here." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and took another step forward. The voice was so clear now that it felt like someone was standing right next to me. I swung the flashlight in front of me, my breath coming in shallow bursts, the beam dancing across the room, landing on the far corner. That's when I saw it. A large wooden chest sat against the wall, its lid slightly ajar, the same lid that had been closed the last time I looked. My pulse quickened, and I felt an almost magnetic pull toward it, as though something was guiding me, forcing me to open it. The whispers in the room had grown to a dull roar, but all I could focus on was that chest. The closer I got, the more suffocating the air became. It was thick, heavy, filled with the weight of something terrible. I reached for the chest, my fingers trembling as I pushed the lid open. Inside, there was nothing but a single, rotting piece of cloth. The fabric was black, almost tattered beyond recognition, and it was covered in something sticky and dark. I recoiled, my stomach turning, and it was then that I heard it again, the voice, this time more frantic, more urgent. "Don't touch it, don't open it." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't realized that my hand was still hovering over the cloth, as if drawn to it, like it was calling to me. But before I could pull away, the attic door slammed shut behind me, and the room plunged into darkness. I felt my heart beat in my ears as I fumbled for my flashlight, panicking. The whispers, the voices, they were everywhere now, coming from every direction, surrounding me, pressing in on me. I could feel the coldness of the air deepening, the very walls vibrating with the intensity of their presence. He shouldn't have opened it. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voices were louder now, maddening, relentless. They were all around me, inside my head, twisting and turning until I couldn't tell where they came from or where they ended. My knees buckled beneath me, and I fell to the floor, clutching my head in my hands as the whispers continued to roar in my ears. "We were trapped here for so long. It's too late for you, we can never leave." And then through the noise, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft, childlike giggle. It came from behind me, and I dared not turn around. "Help us!" I looked down at the chest once more, the piece of cloth still inside. I knew I had to get away. I knew that whatever was here, whatever had been trapped in this house, was never going to let me leave. But as I scrambled toward the door, I heard the voice one last time. "It's too late. We've already taken you." The door wouldn't open. I was trapped. And the voices, the whispers, the things that had been trapped in the walls for so long, they were never letting me go. I don't remember how long I sat in that attic, trapped beneath the weight of the whispers and the suffocating darkness. My mind was spinning, caught between the reality of what was happening and the fear that I was losing my grip on it altogether. I should have been trying to escape, should have been running, but my body refused to move. The shadows in the corners of the attic seemed to have eyes, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. The temperature had dropped even further, and I could see my breath in front of me like a misty cloud. I stumbled toward the attic door, my hands shaking as I gripped the handle. It wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, desperation creeping in, but the door was sealed tight. The room around me seemed to contract, the walls pressing in with a malevolent force. That's when I saw them. At first, it was only a flicker, a movement in the corner of my vision. A long, crawling shape that slithered along the floorboards. My heart skipped in my chest. I turned quickly, my flashlight darting across the room, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, deep and endless, stretching across the floor like dark tendrils. But then the sound came, the unmistakable noise of something moving, something crawling across the floor. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. The air was thick, suffused with a palpable presence, and I knew with a gut-churning certainty that the shadows were no longer just shadows. They were alive. They were crawling toward me. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the floor, where I could see the shadows shifting, creeping closer with unnatural speed. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a chill spread through my entire body. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead, frozen in place. My pulse quickened as I realized what was happening. Whatever was in this house wasn't just whispering anymore. It was reaching out, pulling at me, drawing me into its dark embrace. The shadows, they were coming for me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, choked with fear. My flashlight flickered again, and the light went out completely, leaving me in total darkness. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled with the flashlight, desperately shaking it, but it remained dead. Then I felt it. Cold, clammy fingers brushed against my ankle. I jerked back, but there was no escaping it. The shadows were everywhere now, crawling up my legs, slithering around my arms, pulling me toward the center of the room. The floorboards creaked under the weight of their movement, and I could hear them whispering in voices that were not my own. The words were indecipherable, frantic, all blending together in a maddening chorus. "Let us out, help us, don't fight it." I struggled, trying to free myself, but the shadows clung to me like a second skin. They crawled over my body, slithering under my clothes, cold and invasive, making my skin crawl in a way I had never known before. They were everywhere, winding their way up my arms, my neck, and into my chest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I could hear them inside my head, scratching and gnawing at my thoughts. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just some old house with a few creepy noises. It was something far worse. The house wanted me. The house needed me. And those shadows, they were the fingers of something far older and more terrifying than I could comprehend. They weren't just shadows of the past. They were the physical manifestation of the house's rage, its twisted hunger. I tried to scream again, but all that escaped was a strangled gasp as the shadows wrapped tighter around me, pulling me deeper into their grasp. I could feel my limbs going numb, my vision blurring, as if they were draining the life out of me, little by little. And then I felt a tug, something pulling at my soul, at the very core of who I was. I gasped for air, but it was like trying to breathe underwater. The shadows were dragging me further into the attic, toward the farthest corner, where I saw the outline of something massive, something alive in the shadows, waiting. It was alive, I realized. Whatever was pulling at me, whatever was crawling inside me, wasn't just some twisted nightmare. It was real. And it wasn't just in the walls, it was in the very foundation of the house. "You are ours now." The voice came again, clearer this time, and it was everywhere. In the walls, in the ceiling, in the very air I was breathing. I couldn't fight it anymore. The shadows were all-consuming, choking out every thought, every memory, until all that was left was the dark, the cold, and the whispers. And then I understood. I understood what had happened to the others, the ones who had come before me. The house never lets go. Once it takes you, you are a part of it. You become a shadow yourself. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since I had entered this house, I let myself go. The shadows had won, and there was no escape. When I woke, I wasn't sure if I had died. The room was silent, unnervingly so, and I couldn't feel the cold weight of the shadows pressing in on me anymore. For a moment, I thought it had all been some twisted dream. But as I opened my eyes, I saw the truth. I was still in the attic. The whispers had stopped, but the air was thick with the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, suffocating you, making it impossible to breathe. I felt different, like something had changed inside me, something that couldn't be undone. My limbs felt heavy, as if they didn't belong to me anymore, and I struggled to push myself up from the floor. The light from the setting sun filtered through the cracked windows, casting long shadows across the room. The attic seemed even darker now, darker than it had been before. The walls appeared to pulse with a slow, rhythmic movement, as though the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting for something, waiting for me. I felt it then. a pressure at the back of my mind, an overwhelming sense of presence. I wasn't alone. The house was watching me. No, not just the house, them, the shadows. I turned and my breath caught in my throat. There, standing at the far end of the attic, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a shape that seemed to melt in and out of the darkness. It had no face, only a vague silhouette, a formless mass of shifting shadows. But I knew who it was. The thing that had been pulling me into the darkness. The thing that had been whispering, calling, controlling me. It was the source. The heart of the house's malevolent presence. I wanted to run. I should have run. But I was paralyzed, my feet rooted to the floor as if some invisible force was holding me in place. The figure moved toward me, and I felt its coldness wrap around me like a thick fog. It didn't speak, but I could hear its voice in my mind, echoing in every corner of the room, in the walls, in the floor, in the very air. "You are mine now." The words slid through my thoughts like ice, freezing my very soul. I could feel its grip on me tightening, the weight of its power crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. "You," I gasped, forcing the words past my lips. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer immediately. It simply reached out with a hand made of nothing but darkness. And as it did, the room seemed to contract, closing in on me, suffocating me. I felt my heart race, every instinct screaming at me to escape, but there was nowhere to run. And then it spoke again, but this time its voice wasn't just in my head. It was in the room. It was in everything. This house has been my prison for 2 years. I've been waiting, watching. And now you are the last piece, the last soul I needed. I struggled to breathe, to think, but the shadows around me were thickening, and I could feel my strength draining away. My skin was growing cold, my limbs becoming numb, as if the very life was being sucked out of me. "You freed me, and now you will stay with me forever." The figure's hand was almost upon me, and I could feel it. The pull. It wasn't just physical. It was inside me, twisting, forcing my very being toward the darkness. I fought, but the more I resisted, the tighter the grip became, until I was nothing more than a puppet, controlled by its will. The house was closing in on me. And then, in that instant, something inside me snapped. I didn't know where the strength came from, but I broke free just for a second. I pulled myself toward the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs shaking with exhaustion. The figure in the corner of the room roared, its voice like the sound of 1,000 voices merging into one. But I didn't care. I could feel the darkness reaching for me, but I wouldn't let it have me. I shoved the window open, the old glass cracking and splintering beneath my hands. The air outside was thick with the smell of rain, but I didn't care. I climbed through the window, dragging my body into the outside world. I felt the shadows try to follow me, but they couldn't. The house's grip on me was weakening as I stepped into the light. The last thing I saw before I fell into the dirt beneath the window was the figure standing there at the window staring down at me. The shadows recoiled, slithering back into the dark corners of the attic, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of relief. I had escaped, but as I lay there gasping for air, I knew the truth. The house hadn't let me go. It was still there, still waiting, still watching, and it would never stop. Because once the house has you, there's no escaping. It owns you. Forever. I don't know how I ended up in that house. I wasn't looking for a job, and I certainly wasn't seeking out any haunted locations, but sometimes things just fall into place, don't they? It started innocently enough. A small job listing in the local paper. Caretaker needed for old estate. Room and board provided, experience not required. The pay was minimal, but I'd been out of work for a while, and the idea of living in a quiet, isolated place seemed like a good break from the city, so I answered the ad. The house was tucked away at the edge of a forest, miles from the nearest town. The moment I arrived, I knew something was off. The air around the estate was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the house itself had a brooding, almost menacing presence. It wasn't like any other old mansion I'd ever seen. Its windows were dark, like hollow eyes, and the door creaked open with a slow, deliberate groan, as if it was expecting me. The man who hired me, Mr. Ashford, was an older gentleman with a kind smile and a nervous twitch in his voice. He seemed eager to show me around, leading me through the large, dusty hallways of the mansion. The rooms were heavy with the scent of old wood and stale air. It wasn't the state of the house that unsettled me, though, it was the silence. There was no life here, no sounds of birds or wind or distant footsteps. Just silence, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. He gave me my duties: keep the house in order, prepare meals, and keep to myself. Easy enough. But then, after the first night, things started to change. I woke in the middle of the night to a faint sound, almost like a whisper. It came from the hallway outside my room. At first I thought it was the house settling, the creaks and groans of an old structure. But as the minutes passed, the whispering grew louder, more distinct. It was a voice that wasn't mine. It called my name. Anna. The sound was soft but clear, like someone standing just beyond my door. My heart skipped a beat and I sat up in bed, my breath shallow, listening intently. But the whispering stopped as suddenly as it began. There was no one there when I opened the door, just the endless dark hallway stretching out before me. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I'd been alone in the house all day, and the silence can mess with your mind. But that didn't explain the name I had heard. Anna. I couldn't shake it. The voice, that name, it felt so familiar. It was mine, but it wasn't. It was as though I had known it all my life but had forgotten it. The next morning, Mr. Ashford acted strangely. He didn't seem to notice my unease, but I could see the anxiety in his eyes. It wasn't until after breakfast that he mentioned it. "There's something you should know about the house," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper, as if he was afraid someone might overhear. "It has a way of making you remember things you'd rather forget." I was about to ask him what he meant, but he quickly changed the subject, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. And that was the beginning of the oddities. The next few days blurred together, each one more disorienting than the last. I would hear the whispers again at night, always calling my name, but when I ventured into the hallway, there was nothing but the empty rooms and cold, still air. I began to question whether I was losing my mind. Then, on the fourth day, I discovered something I wasn't supposed to. It was late afternoon, and I had been cleaning the library, the largest room in the house. The air in there was thick with dust, and the shelves were lined with old, tattered books that hadn't been touched in years. As I moved to dust the farthest shelf, a loose book caught my eye. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Curious, I opened it, flipping through the pages until something caught my attention. There, written in delicate, flowing script, was a name. Anna Fairchild. The blood drained from my face as I stared at the name, the same name I had heard whispered in the hallway. My name, but that couldn't be right. I wasn't Anna Fairchild. Or at least, I didn't think I was. The journal described the life of a young woman who had lived in the house many years ago. It was filled with details that made my skin crawl. The long walks she took around the estate, the mysterious illness that seemed to claim her, and the strange disappearance of her family shortly after. The entries grew more erratic toward the end, rambling about strange occurrences in the house, shadows in the corners, and whispers in the walls. The last entry was brief but chilling. I hear it calling again. My name, it wants me to remember, but I can't. I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to leave. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was wrong, deeply wrong with this place. The whispers, the name, it all pointed to one thing. Anna Fairchild had lived here before me, and somehow she was still here. But I couldn't leave, not yet. The name, that forgotten name, gnawed at my mind. It was as if I had been waiting for it all along, as if the house had been waiting for me to remember. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a coldness in the air, an oppressive presence that seemed to settle deeper into the walls of the house. I didn't know who Anna Fairchild really was, but I had a sinking feeling that I was about to find out, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. It was only a matter of time before I saw her. The house seemed to be feeding off my unease, growing heavier with each passing day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I turned a corner or entered a room, the air would thicken, as if something or someone was watching me. At first, I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, the stress of being alone in such an oppressive place. But the more I explored, the more things felt off. The house, despite its size, had no mirrors, or at least no reflective mirrors. nothing that could return my own image. I first noticed this when I ventured upstairs to the hallway that connected the bedrooms. It was odd. Most old houses have mirrors everywhere, hanging in corridors or adorning the walls of rooms, but not here. Just the quiet, dusty air of the house. I turned back to the window, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection was gone, but the unsettling feeling lingered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the house made me tense, my ears straining to catch the faintest sound. I told myself it was the house settling, but the thoughts of the reflection of the woman I had seen kept creeping into my mind. Who was she? What did she want? I tried to push it out of my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. And it wasn't just in my mind anymore. As I lay there in the dark, I heard something faint, just on the edge of my hearing. A soft, slow, dragging sound like fabric brushing against the floor. I tensed, my body stiff with fear. The noise came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of someone, shuffling along the floor. I sat up quickly, scanning the room in the darkness. My heart was pounding in my ears. The sound was unmistakable. It was coming from the hallway. I knew I should stay in my room. I knew I should lock the door and never leave. But something inside me compelled me to get up, to follow the sound, even as it sent chills down my spine. I crept out of bed and into the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my bare feet. The house was suffocatingly quiet now, the only sound the soft echo of my breath and the occasional thud of my heart. I reached the top of the stairs, where the hallway stretched out before me. The shadows seemed deeper here, thicker. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, in the dim light of a single candle I had left burning, I saw the figure again. The woman. She stood in front of the full-length mirror at the end of the hall, staring at her reflection. Her back was to me, and her head was tilted slightly to the side as if studying herself. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, watching her, my pulse quickening. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. There was something about her, something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then she turned. The moment she shifted, I gasped. Her face was gaunt, pale, like it had been drained of all life. Her eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto mine in the reflection. My breath caught in my throat as she smiled. A slow, deliberate curve of her lips. Her smile wasn't kind, it wasn't welcoming, it was something twisted, something that sent waves of terror rushing through me. Her lips parted, and though her mouth didn't move, I heard the words, clear as day. "You can't run from me, Anna." I stumbled back, my heart racing, my stomach turning in knots. How did she know my name? I bolted down the hallway, but when I reached the mirror, it was empty. The reflection was gone. The woman, the smile, everything gone. There was nothing but the dim candlelight flickering weakly in the hallway. I turned around slowly, my eyes darting between the rooms, expecting to find her standing behind me, her cold hand on my shoulder, her breath on my neck. But no. The hallway was silent again. Empty. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that I was seeing things, or the fact that I didn't know how much of this house was real anymore. I rushed back to my room, my heart hammering in my chest, and slammed the door shut. I locked it as if that would somehow keep her away. But I could still hear her. Her voice, soft and insistent, calling to me from the hallway, whispering my name. Anna? I curled up in bed, trembling under the covers. The house felt colder now, colder than it ever had before. And as I lay there in the dark, I knew one thing for certain. The woman in the mirror wasn't just a figment of my imagination. She was real. And she had been waiting for me. But what for? And why was she calling my name? The house was never truly quiet anymore. The whispers had become a constant presence, slipping through the walls, coiling around me in my sleep. But it wasn't just the whispers that kept me awake. It was the phone calls. It started a week after the incident in the hallway. The first night I heard the phone ring, I thought it was a mistake. After all, there was no landline in the house. No one ever called. So when I woke up to the shrill sound of a ringing phone piercing the stillness of the night, I thought it must have been a dream or some trick of the house settling. But then it rang again and again. I stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and made my way down the dark hallway. The house seemed darker tonight, the shadows deeper, as though it were drawing closer. The phone had been installed in the small study at the back of the house, near the kitchen. The moment I picked up the receiver, the line was already crackling, a soft static whispering in my ear. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. "Who is this?" There was a pause, then a faint sound, a raspy, labored breath. It wasn't a person on the other end, not really. The sound was unnatural, as if the very air itself was straining, trying to communicate. And then that voice. Anna. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was soft, low, and distant, but unmistakably clear. It was the same voice I had heard in the hallway, calling my name. The voice I had been hearing in my dreams. I couldn't breathe as I held the phone, my hands slick with sweat. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The line went silent for a long moment, and I thought maybe the call had dropped. But then, in a low, almost mocking tone, the voice returned. "You know who I am, Anna," it rasped. "I've been waiting for you." I recoiled, pulling the phone away from my ear, but the voice lingered in my head. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling behind them, the presence that seemed to hang in the air like a dark cloud. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood frozen in the study, the phone trembling in my hands. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what had just happened. Who was that? How did they know my name? But the question that haunted me the most was, why was it calling me? The phone didn't ring again that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I bolted the door to the study and returned to my room, the shadows following me. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every noise made me jump. Every creak of the house was like a signal, a warning that something was wrong. The next night, it happened again. The phone rang exactly at midnight, sharp and insistent. My heart pounded as I turned over, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering if I could just ignore it. But I knew I couldn't. I had to know what was happening, who was doing this. I couldn't help myself. I grabbed the receiver again. "Anna?" The voice was even closer this time, as though it was standing in the room with me, breathing in my ear. The static crackled, but I could make out the words. "Anna, it's time." My throat tightened, panic rising within me. "What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out. The response came quickly, without hesitation, almost as if it had been rehearsed. "I want you to remember." Then the line went dead again, the silence filling the room like a thick fog. I stood there, holding the receiver, feeling the weight of those words settle over me. Remember. What was I supposed to remember? What had I forgotten? I didn't sleep that night. The phone calls had begun to weave their way into my thoughts, like a thread pulling me towards something I couldn't understand. It was as though the house, the spirits, whatever it was, had all been waiting for me to finally wake up, to remember something I had buried deep inside myself. The next day I tried to ignore it, tried to carry on with my duties as if nothing had happened. But the call came again that night. Midnight sharp. I didn't answer this time. I couldn't. But the phone kept ringing, the persistent sound echoing through the empty house. The ringing didn't stop. It became a constant, like the heartbeat of the house itself, ticking away the seconds, demanding that I listen. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it felt like the sound was inside my skull, burrowing deeper with each ring. "Anna?" It wasn't a phone call this time. It was right outside my door. The voice was so close now, I could almost feel its breath. My heart skipped a beat and I turned toward the door, my pulse quickening. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I wasn't alone in this house, and whoever or whatever was calling my name had no intention of letting me go. With shaking hands, I grabbed the door handle and pulled it open. There was nothing. No one. Just the empty hallway, dark and silent, stretching before me like a maze. But the voice had stopped. The phone calls had stopped. For now. The air in the house had changed. It was subtle at first, a faint shift, like a change in temperature or the pressure before a storm. But I felt it deep in my bones, an unshakable tension that I couldn't ignore. I had been running from it, trying to forget the phone calls, the voice that seemed to haunt me at every turn. But no matter how much I tried to distance myself, I knew I couldn't escape it. The house knew, the walls knew, and whatever was waiting for me here, it was patient. I had tried everything, locking doors, avoiding the phone, even covering the windows with heavy curtains. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop the feeling of being watched. The whispers had grown louder too, and now I could hear them everywhere. In the walls, in the corners of rooms. I had learned to ignore them, but the voice was something else. It was real. It was calling me. That night, just as I had begun to drift into a restless sleep, the phone rang again. Midnight. As predictable as it had been every night for the past week. My heart sank into my stomach, and for a moment I thought about not answering. But I couldn't help myself. Something in me compelled me to pick up the receiver, to hear the voice once more. Anna. The whisper was breathless, soft, but unmistakable. I sat up in bed, clutching the phone, my fingers trembling. What do you want from me? There was a long pause, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I could hear nothing but my own ragged breathing, the oppressive weight of the house pressing in around me. Then, in a voice that was both familiar and strange, the voice spoke again. You forgot, didn't you? I froze. Forgotten? What had I forgotten? Remember, it continued, a hint of urgency creeping into its tone. It's time, Anna. Come to me. I felt the phone slip from my hand as the words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just some trick of the house anymore. This was real. The voice knew me. It knew things about me that no one else could. And that chilling sense of familiarity, the same voice I had heard in the mirror in the hallway in my sleep, was the one that now haunted me from the other side of the line. The house felt suffocating as I stared at the phone on the floor. My mind raced, my thoughts spinning in 1,000 different directions. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to acknowledge what was happening. But I knew, deep down I knew, I had to go back to the place I had buried deep inside my memories, the place I had tried to forget, the old house on the hill. My childhood home. It had been years since I had left. Years since I'd seen the place that had once been a refuge and had slowly turned into a prison. My parents had been gone for years now, but there was something about that house, something I couldn't escape. And now it was calling me back, calling me to face whatever I had left behind. I didn't have a choice. With a deep breath, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. The house was silent now, but I could feel it, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to take that first step. The road to my childhood home was long and winding, but it seemed like nothing at all compared to the weight that was on my chest. I could hardly breathe as I neared the house, the familiar silhouette rising against the night sky. The windows were dark, lifeless. The roof sagged in places, and the overgrown yard was choked with weeds. It looked abandoned, forgotten, just as I had left it all those years ago. But I knew it wasn't empty. The door creaked open with a groan, the hinges protesting against the years of neglect. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. The house had once been warm and full of life. Now it was cold, hollow, just like the whispers that filled my mind. Anna? I froze, my heart racing in my chest. Her voice came from somewhere deep within the house. It wasn't on the phone this time. It was here, in the walls, in the very air. I didn't need to hear it to know what it meant. I had come too far. I had come to face what I had left behind. With each step I took, the voice grew louder, clearer, more insistent. It was no longer a whisper. It was a command. I followed it, drawn by something I couldn't explain, something deep inside me, urging me forward. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stopped. My hand hovered over the railing and I looked up at the dark hallway above. There, at the end of the corridor, was a door. The door to my old room. It had always been locked after I left, locked and abandoned. But tonight it was open, just slightly, as if waiting for me. I couldn't turn back now. The past had returned and it wasn't going to let me escape again. I walked toward the door, the cold draft brushing against my skin as I pushed it open. The room was just as I remembered it. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture covered in sheets of dust, but there, in the center of the room, was a small wooden chest. The same chest I had locked away years ago. The chest that had always scared me. I walked toward it, my hands trembling as I reached for the latch. The whispers were louder now, as though the house itself were breathing, exhaling its dark secrets into the air. I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me, suffocating me, as I opened the chest. And there, in the shadows, was the thing I had buried. A wedding dress, stained with time and something else, something darker. The dress I had never wanted to remember. The dress of the bride who had waited. I'll never forget the dream I had the night my brother died. It wasn't just a dream. It was more like a warning. Something inside me knew that the moment I woke up, everything would change. And I was right. It began innocently enough, just like any other dream. I was in my childhood home, standing in the living room where we used to play together. The house was exactly how I remembered it. Dusty, quiet, but strangely warm, like a memory wrapped in comfort. But something felt wrong, even from the start. It was too quiet, the silence too heavy. I walked through the house, calling for my brother Jason. His name echoed through the empty rooms, bouncing off the walls like a forgotten song. But there was no answer. Not even the familiar sound of him messing around in his old room, no sound of his laughter or footsteps. The house was empty, except for one thing. At the foot of the stairs stood a figure, shrouded in shadow. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, some figment of my dream. But as I drew closer, I realized it was my brother, or at least it looked like him. "Jason?" I called out again, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood there, staring at me with those familiar, dark eyes. But there was something different about his expression. It was hollow, distant, like he wasn't really there. I felt my heart race, an uneasy feeling crawling up my spine as I stepped closer to him. "What's going on? Where are you?" Still, no answer. But his lips moved ever so slightly, as if trying to speak, though no words came out. It was as though he was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear him, couldn't understand. Then, in that strange silence, something happened. His figure began to flicker, like a dying light bulb, and in that moment I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. It wasn't just the loss of a person, it was something far deeper, like I was losing a part of myself. I reached out for him, but my hand passed straight through his figure, as if he were made of smoke. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, staring at the blurry image of my brother that seemed to dissolve before my eyes. The room around me grew colder, the shadows deepening. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, like someone was walking up the stairs. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. There was Jason again, standing at the top of the staircase, but this time, he wasn't alone. A dark figure stood beside him. It was tall, impossibly tall, with an unnerving, featureless face. The figure's presence felt like a weight in the air, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was trying to choke me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by the fear that gripped me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, tight, as I looked at the figure standing there, watching me with a cold, unblinking gaze. And then, as if on cue, the figure reached out its hand toward Jason. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, it was something darker, something final. Jason didn't resist, and with that, the figure dragged him backward into the shadows, pulling him into the darkness, where he vanished. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The house felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter and tighter with each passing second. The last thing I saw before the dream ended was my brother's face, his eyes wide with terror, pleading for help, but no sound came from his lips. Then, everything went black. When I woke up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something real. I knew it was just a dream, or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. But deep down, something inside me was telling me it wasn't, and that something wasn't wrong. The phone call came the next morning. Jason had been found. He had died overnight, alone in his apartment. The police weren't sure what had happened. No signs of foul play, no obvious cause. It was sudden, unexpected, and the worst part? No one could explain it. They said it was as though he had simply faded away. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, the pieces of the dream rushing back to me, each detail clearer than ever. The figure, the shadows, the overwhelming sense of loss. I hadn't imagined it. It wasn't just a dream. Somehow I had known. Some part of me had known that Jason was gone. But the strangest part, I could still hear his voice echoing in my mind, just like in the dream. The sound of him calling out to me. And now, the nightmare had become my reality. I couldn't ignore the dream any longer. I had tried to, but it haunted me, slipping into every waking moment, twisting my thoughts. How could I explain what had happened to Jason? How could I reconcile the phone call about his death with the vision of him in my dream? The dream that felt real. There was no way they could be coincidences. I knew something was wrong. I had to find out what had really happened to my brother, and why I had dreamed of his death before it happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just sit back and accept what the police had told me, that it was a sudden, unexplained death. It didn't add up. So, I started looking into Jason's life, digging through his apartment, his things, anything that might give me a clue. Maybe there was something hidden that would explain it all, some reason why he was taken, and why I had been the one to see it coming. Jason had always been a private person. We weren't close, not the way some siblings are, but that never stopped me from caring about him. He was my brother, and that meant something, no matter how much time we'd spent apart. So, as I entered his empty apartment for the first time since his death, I tried to push aside the hollow ache that filled my chest. The place was quiet, far too quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant buzz of traffic from outside. His things were still where he had left them, his shoes by the door, his jacket thrown over the back of a chair, his favorite mug sitting on the kitchen counter. It was as if he had just walked out. But he hadn't. I searched through his bookshelves, his desk, hoping for some clue, anything that would make sense of the situation. But there was nothing unusual, just the usual mess of papers, a few unread books, and the clutter of someone who had lived alone for years. Then, as I was sifting through his drawer, something caught my eye. A small black notebook. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, as if it had been handled often. It wasn't like any of the other things he had kept. It was something he had hidden. I opened it, flipping through the pages, and what I found sent a chill through my spine. The first few pages were filled with scribbled notes, fragments of thoughts, normal, everyday stuff that didn't seem to mean much at first glance. But as I read further, the tone of the writing changed. The words became more erratic, more frantic. At times it seemed as though he was writing to someone, or something. In one entry, Jason had written about a recurring dream, one that sounded eerily familiar. He described a figure standing at the top of a staircase, a shadow that loomed over him, always watching, always waiting. I froze. It was the same figure from my dream, the one who had taken him. In another entry, Jason wrote about strange phone calls he had been receiving. The first one had come at night, just like the one I had experienced. The voice on the other end had called his name, told him he wasn't alone, that something was coming for him. The same voice I had heard, the one that haunted my dreams. As I read, the pieces began to fall into place, but they didn't bring comfort. Jason had been having the same experiences I had. He had felt the presence, the shadow, and he had been trying to understand what it all meant. And like me, he had no answers. But one entry stood out above all the rest. It was dated just a few days before his death. It's almost time. I can feel it. The figure is getting closer. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. I'm scared, but I don't know how to stop it. Whatever it is, it's coming, and I can't escape. The final words were barely legible, written in a shaky hand as if Jason had been too afraid to even finish his thought. I set the notebook down slowly, my heart racing. It was clear now, whatever had been haunting Jason had somehow crossed over to me. It wasn't just a dream, it wasn't just his problem, it was ours. I needed to know more. I couldn't let Jason's death remain a mystery. But as I turned to leave his apartment, a sudden chill swept through the room. The air grew colder, as if something was standing in the doorway, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. There, at the edge of the hallway, was the figure. It wasn't solid. It was a dark shape, like a shadow stretching out from the walls themselves, its outline jagged and distorted, like something that didn't belong in the physical world. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the figure. But this time, it didn't move. It just stood there, as if waiting. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in terror. The whisper came again, soft and insistent, just like it had before. "Anna, it's time." My hands shook as I grabbed the door handle, pulling it open and stumbling into the hallway. The shadow didn't follow me, but I knew it was still there, watching, waiting for me to face what I had seen. It was as if it were daring me to go further, to uncover the truth, no matter what the cost. As I left the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had claimed my brother was now coming for me too. That night, after I left Jason's apartment, something inside me broke. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the presence from my dreams, the shadow, the figure, was somehow following me. My mind raced, replaying every moment from the past few days, trying to make sense of it all, but the truth seemed just out of reach. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, deep down, I knew this wasn't just some coincidence. Something had happened to Jason, something that had already begun to reach for me. The nightmare was growing more real with each passing moment. The figure, the whispers, the cold that seemed to seep into every corner of my life, they were all signs, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. Jason had been taken, and I was next. I had to find out why, or whatever had claimed him would claim me too. I hadn't even realized how late it had gotten until I found myself standing in the hallway of my apartment building. The lights overhead flickered, casting long, unnerving shadows that stretched out before me. It was quiet, too quiet. The sounds of the city outside, cars honking, people shouting, seemed distant, muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I made my way to the elevator, the heavy weight of my thoughts making each step feel heavier than the last. As I waited for the doors to open, I noticed something strange. A soft thud, then another, and another. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone were walking behind me. But when I turned around, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the flickering light casting an eerie glow on the walls. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the footsteps continued, louder now, closer, like someone was walking right behind me. My breath quickened. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, but the feeling didn't fade. The footsteps had followed me into the elevator. I could hear them, faint at first, but growing louder, closer, like they were just beyond the door, waiting. I hit the button for my floor, the metallic hum of the elevator louder than the footsteps, but they were still there, echoing in the silence. My hands gripped the railing, and I held my breath, praying that whatever was stalking me would leave me alone. The elevator stopped with a sudden jolt, and the doors slid open. I stepped out into the hallway, my heart still racing, my mind spinning. The footsteps had stopped, at least for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me, something in the dark. I walked quickly to my apartment door, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, my pulse pounding in my ears. The moment I opened the door, a cold gust of wind swept past me, sending a shiver down my spine. It was as though the outside world had never existed. The apartment felt like a tomb, heavy with the weight of something unseen. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady my breath. But as I turned toward the living room, I froze. There, standing in the center of the room, was the figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its features hidden in shadow, its presence suffocating. The air seemed to grow colder with each passing second, and I could feel the walls closing in. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I knew it was watching me. It was waiting. And then, from somewhere deep within the dark corners of my apartment, came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, Slow, purposeful. The sound was coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart racing in my chest, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the empty space of my apartment, dark and still. But the footsteps kept coming. Louder now, like they were moving closer, getting closer to me. I backed up against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unnatural heaviness. And then in the distance, I heard a voice. A low, guttural whisper, as if coming from the walls themselves. Anna. My blood ran cold. It was my name. But it wasn't my brother's voice. It wasn't even a human voice. It was something else, something dark and ancient, filled with malice. The footsteps were almost upon me now. I could feel them, the weight of each step thundering in my chest. I turned toward the door, but before I could even move, I felt a cold hand grip my arm, pulling me back. My body froze, paralyzed with terror. The figure was standing in front of me now, its face still hidden in darkness. "You should not have come back," the voice hissed. It was low, like a growl, reverberating in my skull. "The curse has been set in motion, and now you are part of it." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body refused to move, to fight. I was trapped in this suffocating nightmare, unable to escape, unable to even speak. The figure leaned in closer, its breath cold against my face, its presence overwhelming. And then, with a chilling finality, it whispered in my ear, "The footsteps will never stop following you, Anna." And with that, the world went black. When I woke up, I wasn't sure where I was. For a moment, everything felt hazy, as if I had been torn from one reality and thrown into another. The heavy, suffocating darkness of my apartment had lifted, replaced by an eerie silence that felt just as oppressive. But I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't in the living room. I was on the floor, my hands pressed against the cold wood, my body stiff from the fear that had paralyzed me only moments ago. My pulse was still racing, and my chest felt tight, as if something had been pressing down on it. I could feel the weight of the nightmare still clinging to me, its cold fingers wrapped around my mind, pulling me back into its grip. I pushed myself up, my hands shaking as I looked around. The apartment was exactly as it had been before. The couch in the corner, the small table by the window, the scattered papers that had fallen from Jason's notebook. But something was wrong. Something was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned toward the hallway, half expecting to see the shadowy figure standing there again, watching me with its cold, soulless eyes. But there was nothing, just the empty stretch of darkened hallway. Still, the air was thick, heavy with a presence I couldn't explain. I forced myself to stand, each step feeling like a fight against the weight of the fear pressing down on me. I needed to leave. I knew that. I needed to get out of this apartment, away from whatever was haunting me. But as I reached the door, something stopped me. A voice. It was faint, barely a whisper, but I knew it wasn't in my head. I heard it again, and this time I could make out the words, "Anna." The voice was soft, almost tender, like a distant memory, but it sent a chill through my spine, because it wasn't my brother's voice. It was something else. Something worse. Something that knew me too well. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. And there, just inside the dark corner of the room, stood a figure. The figure from my dreams. It was taller than I remembered, its shadow stretching across the walls like a living thing, its presence suffocating, as though it had taken up every inch of space in the room. But this time, something had changed. The figure wasn't as distant as before. It wasn't just watching me from the shadows, it was closer now, much closer. And as I stared into the darkened space where its face should have been, something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadows around its head began to shift, revealing something I couldn't have prepared myself for. A face. Not the featureless, blank mask I had seen before. This time, the face was clear, too clear. It was Jason's face. His eyes, his mouth, the familiar lines of his features. But it wasn't him. The face was twisted, contorted into something wrong. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream, the flesh around his face distorted and stretched as if pulled by invisible hands. It was like seeing a photograph of him, but warped, distorted into something grotesque. The eyes that had once been warm and familiar were now cold, hollow, empty. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that face, from the nightmare that stared back at me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by the horror in front of me. The figure's mouth moved, but it wasn't Jason's voice that came from its lips. No, it was a low, guttural growl, an inhuman sound that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. "It's time," it whispered, its voice sending chills down my spine. "The curse has begun, Anna. You cannot escape it. You never could." I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't want to. The words hung in the air, suffocating me, their meaning slipping just out of reach, like the remnants of a dream fading upon waking. The figure took a step forward and I stumbled back, my hands reaching for the door. But before I could make it, the air shifted again. The room grew colder, the temperature dropping so fast it felt like the very life was being sucked out of the space. I could see my breath now, rising in small clouds before me. And then the footsteps started. Heavy, slow, relentless. They echoed through the apartment, each step vibrating through the floor, reverberating in my bones. They were coming closer. Whatever had taken Jason was coming for me now, and I couldn't stop it. The figure raised its arm, its hand stretching out toward me, and the air grew impossibly cold, so frigid it felt like ice was crawling through my veins. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. All I could do was watch as the darkness in the room began to twist, as the figure loomed closer and closer, its hand outstretched. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take any more, I saw it. The face again, twisted, contorted, pulling itself from the darkness. Jason's face, his eyes wide with terror, his silent scream trapped inside his mouth. And I knew that this was it. Whatever had taken him, whatever had claimed him, was not done with me. It had only just begun, and I would never escape it. Not now. Not ever. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was Jason's face, still screaming, still pleading for help. But it was too late. There was no one left to save us.
Stories may end, but the fear remains. Subscribe to uncover more secrets hidden in the darkness. Until we meet again in the world of nightmarish shadows.